Thank you so much. Thank you for letting us present today, Richard. Very excited to be here. I'm Rachel, and I will be discussing more along the lines of best practices. And Tanya, our HR director, is going to be focusing on the legal aspects of our discussion today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and also we're happy to be presenting with your group again. It's been a little while since we were in front of you, but we're happy to be welcome back.
Yes, thank you. So today's agenda, we are going to be discussing writing an effective job posting. So difference between what a job description and posting is. Strategic tactics to prep for candidate interviews. So we ask our candidates to prep when they come in for interviews. We also ask that you do the same. Best practices for conducting an interview, including do's and don'ts. This is where Tanya is going to focus in a little bit more on the legal aspects of questions we can and cannot ask during an interview. And a quick look into your hiring process. Is it costing you skilled candidates? So before we get started, one of the things that you're going to hear us emphasize throughout this presentation is that we are in an extraordinarily tight candidate market. There's a few reasons for that, and I'd like to start with giving you some numbers, actually, that may attribute to that factor. If you had to guess, I'd like you guys each to think of a number. What's the hourly equivalent for somebody on unemployment benefits in the state of California right now, if they are receiving full unemployment benefits? So just have a number in mind. And I'd like to share with you that it's actually $22.93 per hour based on a 40-hour work week. So somebody sitting at home able to receive full benefits is getting $22.93 an hour. If an employee has earned $15 an hour, worked an average of 40 hours during the last 40 hours a week during the last 6 months before filing for unemployment benefits, they're eligible for $20.43 an hour. So they just got an increase in pay to sit at home, essentially. Something else to keep into, or something else to consider is if somebody qualifies for all plans that are available out there, they're eligible to receive up to 59 weeks of benefits, of unemployment benefits. So these are some of the challenges that we're presented with right now and why it's such a tough market. There's some additional stats that I want to share quickly. These are all from April and beyond, or previous to April, but 53%, there was a 53% increase in open jobs in the last 90 days, so from April and the 90 days previous, so 53% more jobs. There's 46% fewer job seekers from April in comparison to January, just a few months previous to that. So as you can see, we are just really in a crunch. So a lot of the information we're going to share today, again, you'll hear me emphasize certain aspects of that just to help if you're actively looking for candidates. There's a few little tweaks and recommendations we have that may help you. So just starting off with writing an effective job posting, there is a difference between a job posting and a job description. Part of that is the information that you're putting out there. So in a job posting, there's a few recommendations we have to attract the best candidates. One is to keep the job title as short and simple as possible to maximize visibility and apply rates. So part of that is job boards all have algorithms that they, that they run. If I'm a job seeker, let's say, for example, I'm a medical assistant and I put in, I'm looking for a medical assistant position. If you have an expanded job title that says, busy practice, seeking medical assistant, that needs to be bilingual in Spanish, that's going to be pushed down in reference to where your job is on that job board. So if I'm a medical assistant and I plug in medical assistant, that's what I'm going to see first. And then your position may be further down the list. So if they've gone through 10, 15, 20 pages of jobs and you're down on the 30th page, they might not even get to you. So again, keeping the job title simple and short is the best approach. Providing a company overview, this is a really a great opportunity to sell your organization. This is where you're going to stand out from other practices. It's a great opportunity to introduce your company. You want to tell your company story. So what's your company culture? How long have you been in business? And this is also a really good opportunity for you to grab the job seeker's attention by answering why your company. So what sets you apart from the practice that's next door to you? It could be benefits that you offer or certain perks. So maybe you offer a flexible schedule. Maybe it's the location, you're right off the freeway. Maybe it's a favorable schedule. Maybe you have growth opportunities, so room for advancement. It could be a simple, we have a client that pays for lunch every Friday. That's a benefit, right? So this is really where you want to advertise, what do you do? What does your practice offer that somebody else, another practice may not? Next, you want to summarize the position or the role. So you want to provide an overview of the role. Is this a new position? Who would this person be reporting to? What will this person be doing on a day-to-day basis? So this is a great opportunity to answer some of those questions that job seekers may have. In writing an effective job posting where you're listing the responsibilities of the position, as well as the requirements, this is not where you cut and paste your job description and put it right in there. You want to definitely highlight what the actual responsibilities are, maybe the top 5 to 7. Same thing with the requirements. Instead of listing every, if you have 50 responsibilities that person is going to be managing, you don't want to put all 50 in the job posting. You may scare off some of your candidates. So there is a preference of using a bullet point format versus a paragraph, and you want to be as specific as possible. So as an example, if you're looking for an appointment scheduler, instead of just putting appointment scheduler, list how many appointments are they going to be scheduling. So is it 40? Is it 50? How many surgeons are they scheduling for? Same thing if you're looking for a front office. Instead of just greeting patients and answering phones, you may want to be a little bit more specific in how many patients are you seeing daily. Also, how many inbound calls. So listing the job requirements, I would really highlight here, you want to separate what your preference is versus what the requirements are. So what does this person have to have to work at your practice versus what do you wish, your wish list, what do you wish this person had? So here's where you're going to put the required skills for this job. So what do they have to have as far as the skill set in order to work versus what are you hoping they have? How much experience is needed for this job? I have to say, we have had some clients and, being in staffing, we're definitely in a place where we see, work with a lot of different practices. So we see a lot of different things. We've had clients come to us and say they want a temperature screener, but they want, they want an MA that has 2 years of experience. So is that really needed for a temperature screener, or is that just kind of the number that you have that you maybe in years prior have required for that type of, for a medical assistant? So really keep in mind how much experience do you really need versus what you're hoping for. Obviously, what certificates, license, or education are required for this position. Again, definitely separate your requirements from the preferences. And due to the pandemic, one of the things that we would recommend is actually listing if COVID testing is required or if you have vaccination requirements. So we do have a few clinics that we work with that are requiring the vaccine at this time. It's good to put that up front in the event that there's a candidate that really isn't in the position or does not want to take that take the vaccination. You kind of eliminate that candidate up front. And then don't forget to include how to apply. If you're wanting to provide a phone number so they can contact you directly, if there's a specific email address, if you're asking for a cover letter, you definitely want to make sure that you're including clear and easy instructions to follow. So what to look for on a resume? I've been in staffing for 14 years, and Tanya has probably seen thousands of resumes herself. I think a part of this is personal preference, but there are some key factors to look for. So obviously content and what the person has done is very relevant. So if there's, again, specific skill sets, those are the first things you want to be on the lookout for. Grammar and spelling. I know some clients, if there's one error on a resume, they, say, hey, really not interested because they had a grammatical error. So I would encourage you to say, is it very relevant for that position? So if somebody has a couple typos on their resume, but they show all of the skill sets that you're seeking, I would encourage you to go ahead and contact that candidate anyways. Longevity versus job hopping. When I first started reviewing resumes, I was always seeking longevity, like, oh, that's just, great. That shows the candidate has stability. And as I'm sure you've seen in, as you review resumes, that's just not the case anymore. So there's a number of reasons why candidates may have some job hopping on their resumes. It could be they had to take care of an ailing parent. It could be that they moved from one state to another. So I just encourage you to take a look at the reasons why somebody has a little bit of short term or any type of gaps of employment. Experience versus trainability. This is another factor. I think now more than ever, we're seeing more and more practices that we work with really loosen up the requirements on experience. And in some instances, are willing to take interns and train. Again, as I mentioned before, we are just in an extraordinarily tight candidate market. So this is something to consider if you have to have the experience for that position. Is there somebody in your practice that could train on specific skill sets? Maybe a candidate has, 5 out of 10 things you're looking for. Of the 5 things they don't have, is that something that you would be able to train on? And then the other thing is skills and what's not on the resume. Sometimes, candidates don't always put everything on a resume, or they don't think it's important, or they forget, oh, I did this, I should have included that. So again, if a candidate has most of what you're looking for, I would encourage you to call and at least ask, hey, I saw you have, this particular skill. Do you have this? And then education, which should be listed. And I think most of the candidates are pretty good about that. So prepping for the interview. One of the things that we encourage candidates to do is prep for an interview. Make sure that they're ready, up front. They have a lot of information and are prepared. Keeping in mind the market, candidates are actually, they have several options available to them. So they're looking for a smooth process. And this is an opportunity for you to show them, hey, we respect your time, respect that you're applying for a position. So it's really a great idea to prep, and there's a few things that you can do. One is to set clear expectations with the candidate before you interview. So as an example, if you have any type of testing that you're going to be doing, that may be something you want to let them know up front. Like, hey, when you come in, the first 30 minutes, you're going to be doing some testing. Or you're going to be interviewing with multiple people, not just myself. Or it could be you're going to be shadowing for 30 minutes to an hour with a front desk person. So just be prepared for that. So the more you can set those clear expectations of what to expect, the better off that candidate can be prepared. Also, to determine the platform or the meeting platform you're going to use. I know as the pandemic is changing, people are going back to, or organizations are going back to face-to-face interviews. But if you are still using Zoom, you want to make sure you're letting the candidate know up front if there's specific parking instructions, any other detail. Hey, we're tough to get to. Hey, you have to pay for parking. Those are all things you want to set the expectation up front. And then if possible, for example, we work with hospitals where the parking instructions are pretty complex. So if and when available, even providing them with written instructions. As I mentioned, during the pandemic, Zoom was a huge platform, or Teams. was a huge platform to interview candidates versus those face-to-face. So if you're still using technology to interview, just make sure that you're prepared, that you test your platform before the interview. Does your camera and microphone work? Is your laptop charged or plugged in? We literally had a situation where we had a client that their laptop went dead in the middle of the interview. So those small things make a big difference in a smooth interview process. And then have a backup plan in the event that there's an issue. Do you have the candidate's phone number handy? So if something goes awry, you can pick up and call them immediately. One of the other things that we would recommend is just minimizing distractions. So you want to make sure that you have a quiet place. So if you're in a busy practice and you get a lot of knocks on your door, maybe in putting up a sign that says interview in progress, or something that will minimize those distractions. If you're doing any type of, again, Zoom interview or something along those lines, and you're typing, like to take notes, just let the candidate know, because they could view that as you're working and not really paying attention. So it's a good idea just to let them know, again, what the expectations are and what you're doing through the process. So part of prepping for the interview is actually having a copy of the candidate's resume and cover letter if they have one. Well, most candidates will bring in a copy of their resume with them in the event they can't for some reason, or they don't, or they forget. It's just easy to have that with you. You want to take a quick look and review the resume and the cover letter prior to the interview, which will help you set a list of interview questions. Definitely want to have a few that you're going to ask ready. If you have a template that you use, for example, you're interviewing a medical assistant, we always ask those questions. I would encourage you, instead of just asking those questions, if there's a piece that doesn't really make sense on the resume, maybe have some additional notes or questions jotted down and ready to ask. And again, if you're taking written notes during a face-to-face or typing during the interview, let the candidate know what you're doing so they don't think you're distracted. So conducting the interview. Okay, so interviews should be conversational. The objective is really to take the first few minutes and build a rapport with the candidate. They're nervous, right? And coming in, they may be very anxious to be there, and not everybody is going to say that. So you want to make sure that you establish that rapport, smile, make good eye contact, say hello, use the person's name. You can ask simple questions if it's a face-to-face interview, like, hey, did you have any trouble finding the place? If you know that there's any commonalities, whether it's a place that they've worked previously, or if it's maybe they went to the same college as you or something along those lines, just kind of be an icebreaker, give them a few minutes to get comfortable before you start the interview. And as we mentioned, based on the time that you have allotted, you definitely want to have a list of interview questions in advance to determine, can they do the job? Will they fit your company? The questions you ask should definitely be in line with what information you're seeking. There's just a couple of examples here. So if they can do the job, why they chose their particular field in healthcare, asking questions about their training, asking skills-based questions. If they're a fit to your company, if that's what's really important to your organization, is more the culture fit. You can ask scenario-based questions. So for example, tell me a time when, describe a situation when, give an example of, or have you ever. Continuing with that, asking open-ended questions are the best assessment if they're a good fit with your company culture. So what gets them excited to come to work? What does work-life balance mean to you? So if somebody, and it's a great question, if somebody's looking to work 8 to 5 and on average you have 2 hours of overtime a day, just gives you an idea if they're going to be a good fit. The other thing that we would encourage you to do is, if synergy in the office and being a part of your organization's culture is important, One of the things that you can do is ask a team member to sit in on an interview or have that as a second interview. Now we are going to get into more of the legality of can and cannot ask questions. So it's really important during an interview that we're asking the right questions, but also asking questions that we're legally able to do so. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Tanya.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. And just to piggyback on something that Rachel mentioned before, one of the items or one of the questions that I find very useful when I do an interview is a question that is my personal favorite, and that is, what can I tell you about this job that would cause you to walk out of here and say, I don't want to work there? That will give you probably the most honest answer out of the entire interview, because they will tell you, oh, tell me that I'm going to be working long hours, or tell me that people don't get along in the office. You know, so you'll get more information than just a basic question that the employee may have rehearsed an answer to. This one kind of takes them a little bit off guard because it's not a question that too many people ask. So there's a freebie for you guys. So let's talk about some of the things that you can and you cannot ask. Obviously, we live in the wonderful state of California where we have more do-nots than we do do's. So there's a couple of things that you have to remember, and that is the California Fair Employment and Housing Act does prohibit for non-job related inquiries to be made of candidates. So that's either in an application or verbally, and you have to make sure that you don't cross those boundaries. And we're going to go over each one of these things. At the end of the presentation, we are going to be sharing the handouts. In addition to that, we have also compiled, as a gift from MetaQuest to you all, a list of all of these categories that we're presenting right now, plus a list of questions that are illegal, plus the alternatives on how to ask similar questions in order to get the answers that you need, so that that will help you when you are drafting your interview process. So let's talk about the first thing, and that is age. Now, with age, I can tell you that in California, it does protect anybody who is age 40 and older. So yay, I'm in that category now. But we want to make sure that we do not ask people how old they are. Also be careful of asking people, when did you graduate? Because that will actually help you determine how old they are. So you want to make sure that you're staying away from those things. You also want to make sure that you're not asking when they were born, what's their birth date on an application or during the interview process. Now, when you get to the onboarding part of it, you can ask the date of birth because of benefits questions, like, for example, insurance. The second thing that we have is race questions. So you want to make sure that you're not asking anything that would be perceived as discriminatory when it comes to that. Also, with color, it's the same thing. And with religion, you do have to be very, very careful. Sometimes people will ask, what organizations are you a part of? And that question can be very detrimental, because in some cases they will say, well, I belong to such and such church. So right there, you just open the question or the door to a potential claim, because people will say, well, they didn't hire me because I disclosed that I was such and such religion. So please, if you're asking what organizations do you belong to, don't. Just kind of stay away from that. If you are wanting to know whether they're a member of RCMA, then you can definitely ask that, because that is a professional organization. So you want to make sure of that. The other thing that we want to make sure of is that we don't ask any questions regarding marital status. With marital status, you should be asking questions such as, do you have somebody to watch over your children? Do you have any child care issues? those could be perceived as discriminatory because you would obviously only ask for them for one gender instead of the other ones. You also don't want to say something like, oh, that's a beautiful engagement ring. Are you getting married soon? Definitely don't ask that. That is not a question to be asking in an interview. Also, do you plan to have children? I have heard that question during an interview and just about, wanted to have pointy heels so I could kick the person under the table. But you definitely want to make sure that anything having to do with pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, or any related medical conditions, or anything regarding their spouse, that you do not ask any of that during an interview. Now, the one that is gaining a lot of traction for claims against employers or candidates who went for an interview is the gender question. That includes any questions regarding gender identity or gender expression. You do not want to ask the question, do you identify more as a male or as a female? Those are questions that if you hire someone because they are the most qualified candidate during the interview process and after the review of their qualifications, when they're being onboarded, that is a question you can ask, but you've already made an offer to them. So you're not asking that prior to that. So please make sure that you take that into consideration during your interview process. The other one is sexual orientation. On an application, you do, remember in California, you have to list male, female, and non-binary. So those are the three categories. So you shouldn't have to ask it during the interview. That should be in your application. The other one is national origin or ancestry. You want to make sure that you don't say something like, oh, what a great accent. Where are you from? That is going to prompt the national origin or ancestry, especially if you don't hire that person. That could be brought up as a reason why you discriminated against them. Mental and physical disabilities are a little bit more obvious. If you do see somebody that has a physical disability, don't ask about the disability. One of the things that you can ask, and it should be in your employment application, is, you provide them with an actual job description. This is what the position will do, including if they have to lift, if they have to push, pull, twist, bend, lift, any of those things. If you have things that have to be lifted, like up to 45 pounds, let's just say, you want to make sure that you say, this job requires that somebody lifts up to 45 pounds. Are you able to perform the job duties as explained to you with or without accommodation? That's the only thing you can ask during an interview. That's it. If they say, yes, but I may need an accommodation, say, okay, thank you, write it down. And then if you decide that that is the best and most qualified person and you want to hire this person, then you enter into what's called the interactive process. What is the accommodation? But not until after you have made the offer. You don't start going into those things right away. The other one is medical conditions. Obviously, AIDS is one of them. Pregnancy is another big one. You do not ask about, especially if you see somebody that is pregnant, you don't start asking those medical conditions. So that is another one. The genetic characteristics, questions such as, is there a history of, such and such illness in your family? Those are not questions that should be asked during an interview, so please stay away from them. For military and veteran status, the question that can be posed is, what skills did you acquire during your time in the military that will help you be a good team member for us and for this job? That is a good question to ask, but do not ask about, what rank were you in the military, and what did you serve, when did you serve, where did you serve? Those are all things that if the person wants to disclose, they'll tell you, once they're employed with you. But during an interview, you are there to find out if that person is a qualified candidate for you. The other one is criminal history. With California, we have to be really careful because we do have what we call ban the box. So you want to make sure that you're not inquiring about any criminal history. Remember, you can only run a background check until after you have provided people with a conditional offer of employment. That conditional offer of employment just simply means you've given them an offer letter that says, depending on the results of the background check and a drug test, we will go ahead and extend the job offer to you or the employment to you. So just make sure that you're not asking about criminal history. If somebody does say, do you hire felons or do you hire people that have been in jail, the standard question should be, we take a look at it on a case-by-case basis and we follow all of California ban-the-box processes. That way you are protected. All right? I know the first answer would probably be, oh, heck no, we do not. But just make sure that you follow the ban-the-box process. And the last thing is salary history. You do not want to ask, well, what were you making at your previous position? The only question that you can ask about salary history is, what is the salary that you're currently looking for? You cannot ask about past. And this is because California does have a law that states that it's equal pay for equal jobs, and that means you cannot ask about past salaries. As you probably know, there are females that are making considerably less than their male counterparts, and this is one way that the state feels will even up the playing field by not asking about how much they were making in the past. Instead, what are they wanting to make, or what are they currently looking for in that? One last thing that we wanted to add on here is regarding COVID. I know that a lot of practices, especially the ones that MediQuest has been working with, are actually requiring for COVID vaccines to be part of this. The question that you can ask is, have you or are you planning on being COVID vaccinated? If it is a requirement for the job, it is okay to ask. If you do not have a full written COVID policy, you cannot require it and you cannot ask those questions. So please make sure that that you have at least a COVID policy in writing if you are mandating that everybody has that. And the reason that you want to have that policy is because you have to have the process as to what happens if somebody cannot take the vaccination because of religious reasons or because of medical reasons. So that all has to be in writing so that you could follow that process. In addition to that, if you are asking for COVID vaccine proof that somebody has taken that, it's really important that you treat that, again, with a policy, and that you treat that document as medical documentation. I know that I'm preaching to the choir with this group. Everybody handles medical information as very private because of HIPAA. So just make sure that you keep that vaccination record in a separate file from their personnel file and in a lock cabinet that very few people have access to.
And let me ask a few clarification questions that we've got in chat. I know, first of all, we just spoke about the COVID-19 vaccine, and all of the offices are addressing and dealing with that. I would just tag on along with that, that there's always an opportunity to consult with our RCMA and San Bernardino partner, Talker Law Firm. And these are such sensitive areas that we definitely would encourage you to seek out that consultation. So I would throw that out. Tanya, as you're mentioning, so are you seeing that many of your medical practices are requiring the COVID-19 vaccine?
We're seeing, not necessarily on a weekly basis, but every few weeks, a new client is adding to that list and mandating the vaccination. So we have a handful right now. that are.
During the interview, can you ask why they left their previous position?
You can definitely ask why the person left the previous position. It is completely okay to ask why there are gaps of employment. However, if they do disclose that they left because they had to take a medical sabbatical, do not ask what the reason or what the medical condition was.
Well, maybe one more question is, are there any questions that you would recommend that you haven't mentioned already of something that you definitely would want to ask?
I know from the HR legal side, you definitely want to find out, what it is that this person is looking for in their next position. That will tell you a lot as to whether the person would be a good fit and whether the job that you're actually looking for or interviewing for is going to be a good fit for that person, because it has to be mutual. Your job has to fit that person and that person has to fit the job. So, just make sure that you ask them, what is it that you're looking for in your next opportunity, in the opportunity you're currently employing for. I think that is a very important question, especially nowadays.
Yeah, no, I think that is the two that primary that I always ask are that, what you're seeking and in your job search, and what are you looking for in your next position, but also their reasons for leaving. I think are very relevant to Tanya's point. If it's a medical, condition of any sort, we can't ask anything around that. But if it is, hey, the practice isn't offering me enough growth opportunity, or I've been here for 2 years, I don't have benefits, I don't have, I'm not eligible for an increase in pay, then we know, especially being the middleman, the staffing agency, that we're going to help this candidate find somebody that does offer those things. So those are typically the two of the questions we ask on a very consistent basis. So just wrapping up the interview process, finalizing the interview, you want to also, once you've asked all of your questions, you also want to give the candidate the opportunity and allow ample time. Don't rush through it. Allow them to ask questions to you. Whether it's about the work environment, what they should expect in training, but give them time to ask questions. If you are interested in the candidate, and again, I said I was going to say this a few times, we are in an extraordinarily tight candidate market. So if you're interested in a candidate, I cannot encourage you enough to expedite the process to the best of your ability as quickly as possible. If you're interested, if you think this is a candidate, hey, they're a great fit, they check all the boxes, we have a few more interviews, let them know, like, hey, loved this interview, thought it was great. Give them a strong indication that you're interested and that you'll be reaching out to them with next steps as quickly as possible. If you know you're wrapping up interviews on Thursday evening, let them know you'll hear from us first thing Friday morning, so that if they're actively interviewing and they're also interested in that position, they aren't going to take another opportunity without speaking with you first. You can ask for references if you're moving forward. That's another indication that you're interested. So just another way to keep them engaged. So a couple of things to remember, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes as well. But again, in this market, if you're seeking that perfect candidate that meets all of your check marks, you're going to miss out on great people. I would encourage you to be flexible where you can, whether that's, they're lacking one part of, they meet 9 out of 10, but, check marks, if they're missing one skill set that's trainable. If maybe, once a month they need to leave early, an hour early on a Friday, just be as flexible as possible. Again, otherwise you're going to be missing out on great people. It's easier to train a skill than it is personality. So if the position that you're hiring for, let's say it's a front office, and you find a great candidate that has wonderful, personality, and oh my gosh, they're going to be perfect for our patient population, but they're missing this skill or two. Again, I would highly encourage you to train that skill, because it's much easier to train a skill than it is for the right person, the right personality for the position.
If I can add just one thing to this list too, is Sometimes it does take a little while for us to make our minds as to whether we're going to be hiring a person or not. But it's really important to know that we have had candidates that within 24 hours have 2 different offers or are off the market within 24 hours. So the quicker you can make that decision, the better off you're going to be. Again, the good candidates are very few and far between nowadays. So as Rachel mentioned, the faster you expedite and the faster you can make a decision, the better off you're going to be if you could find a really good candidate.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. And to add on to that, what we're starting to see as a trend is counteroffers. So somebody is looking for, they're not quite satisfied where they are. For one reason or another, they're looking. Now, all of a sudden, because we're in this market, their current employer is like, okay, you wanted a couple more dollars an hour or benefits, so let's see what we can do. So we're getting a lot of candidates that are actually staying where they are because we're getting, they're getting counteroffers from the current employer. So it's tough. Sometimes the extra dollar is worth it. I can't tell you how many situations we've seen where it's down to 50 cents or a dollar, literally 50 cents or a dollar. Great candidate. They have the skill set, they have the personality. Our budget is this, and we can't go above this. And the candidate is, looking for 50 cents or a dollar more. So where you can pay that a little bit, and I know that presents a challenge with what you're paying your current employees, and that's always, a challenging area, but I would definitely implore you to consider if that 50 cents or a dollar, if it's within the budget to offer it. And then just remembering, obviously we're in an ever-changing world. Things are different than what they were 6 months ago, right? Pre-pandemic, 5 years ago. So it's definitely important to try to be as flexible as possible. If you've been a hiring manager for a long time, you may have a certain idea, but to just try to, I would encourage you to try to change as things start to change. And different generations prompt different behaviors. The most talked about generation, I will say, good, bad, or indifferent, is millennials, right? So we have a lot of conversations about millennials and how their behaviors are different. So just know that as new generations are coming into the workforce, we have to expect that there's going to be change, and we can't always expect that things are going to be as they've always been. So that flexibility is really, really important. And then just briefly, we see this, unfortunately, a lot more than I'd like to say. But it signs the candidate is not interested in a position. So things to keep in mind as you are going through your interview process. If you run into any of these, it could be an indication that the candidate's really not as interested as they may have initially said. So a lack of response or communication is a huge indicator. Not sure if you're familiar with this term. It's very in staffing, we talk about it quite a bit, but it's where a candidate ghosts you. Talk to them Monday, talk to them Tuesday. It's Thursday and they haven't called us back, right? We text, we call, we email, we call emergency contact sometimes. So it does happen, but that is an indicator that they may not be interested. A lack of effort, if you have a process that you're asking them to follow and you're just having to really drag them through that process and follow up, do they have that sense of urgency? Delays in an interview. So maybe they're pushing back, I can't make it on this day. Can we push it back? Can we push it back one more time? Not to say things don't happen, because they absolutely do. And I would ask you, encourage you to be flexible if somebody needs to reschedule their interview. But if it's happening multiple times, time after time, then that's something to consider. They may not be interested. A lack of preparation. This could go either way. So in all honesty, a lot of people don't know how to interview. They don't know how to prep for the interview. They don't know they're supposed to look up the website. Maybe nobody ever shared that with them. So it's not always a sign, but it may be an interest. It could be, especially depending on the level of the candidate. So no clear reason for their job search or job hopping. We talked about previously job hopping, and to try to really dig into the reason why. And if they can't give you a clear explanation or why they're looking for work, then this to me would be an indicator that may not be the greatest candidate and they may not be super interested. If they don't have any questions, again, that's not necessarily always a bad sign, because again, they may not know that they should have questions to ask. but in terms of interest level, that could be an indicator. They're slow to get you references. That could be for a couple of reasons. One, that they're not interested, and maybe what they put on their resume may not be exactly accurate. So that is an indicator. We get this a lot. Oh, I'll give it a try. Well, yeah, I'll try it. So really not a commitment of, yes, I'm excited to go there. You know, hey, I'm looking forward to working at this practice. That's definitely an indicator. I'm so sorry. And then a lack of commitment or holding out for another interview. This is very, very common right now. You know, candidates, when they're applying for positions, they're not applying for one, and they're not just in one interview, they're in multiple. So one of the questions that I do like to ask, Richard, and you asked this earlier, is, you know, if they're interviewing at multiple places, what is your interest level in this particular company? So if I'm the hiring manager, hey, you mentioned you have a few other interviews, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in this particular opportunity, maybe versus another one that you're interviewing for? So your interviewing process, you know, is it taking way too long? So if you've had your position open for a couple of months, if you say, man, I've interviewed 20 candidates and we just can't find the right one, you know, I don't understand. There's a number of things that I would encourage you to take a look at. One is supply and demand. So there are actually, and this is something that MetaQuest offers, there's supply and demand report. So for your particular region and for one particular position, let's say medical assistant, for your area, we can show within the last anywhere from 3 months to 2 years how many jobs there are versus how many candidates available. So this is a report that I've pulled quite frequently more recently. And there's sometimes where there's literally maybe 200 candidates and 1,000 jobs, like literally. So in your interview process, as we talked about earlier, if you're holding out for that perfect candidate, that candidate may not be there, not just because, you know, they don't exist, but also because the market that we're in, there's just not enough candidates available. So that's something to definitely take a peek at. The other, and I touched upon this slightly earlier, is the salary or the compensation that you're offering. Is what you're offering relevant for the market? So within a 5 to 10 mile radius of your practice, are there practices that are offering a couple dollars more an hour? That's what you're competing with, right? This is right now, again, as I said it multiple times, and this extraordinarily tight candidate market, that's something that is, you know, swaying where candidates are applying or where they're going or where they're taking offers. Definitely, if your process is taking a long time, there are some things that I would encourage you to do, and that's reevaluate the position. So we talked about earlier, what skills does a candidate have to have versus what your wish list is, right? Really get back down to the bare necessities of what do they have to do this job and what can you train. So if you have a wish list that you're including when you're interviewing candidates, start taking a look or reassessing, you know, what are things that we can move around? What are things that we can do without? What are things that we can train? So is what you're looking for realistic? We have an expression in staffing, purple squirrel. So sometimes we receive orders from our lovely clients, and we definitely appreciate them. But sometimes they're really not realistic, right? They want 20 different things. They're not within the pay rate. The supply and demand is, you know, way through the roof. There's just something to take a look at and reevaluate. Again, if your interview process is taking way too long, if you're not able to find the right candidates, something that we can certainly help with and talk you through. And last but not least, the salary survey. So this data is actually about 6 months old, and Richard and I actually talked about this on, I believe it was Friday. And we are including this, although I will share with you if there are specific positions that you're looking to hire for and you want more up to date, because even within the last 6 months, some of these have shifted, especially the starting rate. So $15.50 an hour. I can tell you we have several positions right now, and the lowest, or the starting rate, I should say, of the positions that we have right now are 16 on up. So even this might be a little bit outdated. So if, again, there are positions that you're looking to hire and you have questions if your salary or the compensation you're offering is within the correct range, I'm more than happy to run that data for you specifically.
So let me ask, first of all, with the federal government paying extra money to unemployed people, how much longer is that currently set up to go till what date?
So currently the federal government is scheduled to keep those $300 a month going through September of this year. So it's going to be a while. There are 21 different states right now that are actually stopping the federal aid. California is not one of them. So chances are, because we do have a governor who is very proactive in the unemployment area, that is not going to go away anytime soon. But right now, the federal government has only budgeted those $300 through September.
The first one is that when you ask for references and they list family members, should you ask for previous employers or should you just automatically call the previous employers? What do you recommend for references?
Well, it depends what you're looking for. If you're actually looking for references in regards to how the person works, then absolutely, you need to ask for professional references. If you're looking just to see what this person is like on a personal level, then a personal reference is fine. Most people want professional references, so that may be something that you may want to clarify in your application or when you are requesting for references, is to state whether you want personal or professional references. That way you don't have to keep going back to that candidate.
Now, Tanya, I know that when I called on references for people that I have interviewed and I'm looking to offer them a position, is that I really don't get much of a response from the companies that I call. And I think it's for legal purposes. They just don't answer anything. What are some questions I can ask?
Sure. So the most common information that you're going to be able to get from a previous employer is date of employment, date they left employment, and possibly, if you have assigned authorization, the salary and the position that the person held. Those are legally the only questions that a former employer can answer without any issues. Now, there is a question that you can ask, and you have about a 50-50 chance of them asking or answering, and that is the person eligible for rehire? They'll either say yes, no, or we can't answer. But I can tell you that about 50% of the time you'll get a yes or you'll get a no. So then that gives you an idea as to whether that person was a good employee there or not.
Well, it looks like that is the end of the questions that are in the chat. And we are at about the 1 hour mark. And I just want to thank you again, Rachel and Tanya. And want to encourage all of our RCMA members to get a hold of them if they have any staffing questions or interviewing questions. And again, we will be sending out the presentation shortly along with those interview questions. And also be sure to complete the survey about this webinar to help us understand the value that we're bringing to you, or any questions or topics that you would like to have us address in the future. Thank you.